Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today with our final installment in our NSF-GRFP application preparation series. We're delighted to have Dr. Tony Butterfield with us from the Department of Chemical Engineering, who will share with us his wisdom on graduate research plan statements, which is one of the core documents of the application. So take it away, Tony.
Thank you, Matthew. I'll see my screen, right? We're good. I hope. Good. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Yeah, I'm Tony. He, they. Everybody just calls me Tony. Yeah, this is being recorded, so be careful what you say. A little introduction. I am a professor here in chemical engineering. Worked in industry for a bit. Got my PhD here, my master's degree, UC San Diego. So I know a lot about this particular school. And I stick my tongue out when I think real hard. That's me in the 90s taking the lab class I teach now. The most important thing that you could probably copy down is this bit.ly link, because it will link to these slides and you can go ahead and get the other links from that. But then I also have some example applications that you can go and look at their research statements from winning applications. I think I have one honorable mention in there that then went on to get be awarded the GRFP, so you can kind of compare what kind of made that transition for that person. I do have their permission. Some of them are redacted. And this is a public link. They know that they can get out there. Just please don't, widely share them. I should get a bunch more from our last round and put them in the same folder. Stop me if you have any questions. The other thing I wanted to put on your radar is in September, early October, I do a bunch of workshops. You've probably had a lot of this information already. Because I don't know exactly when the due dates are, I haven't set the dates for these workshops. The first one is just general info session. The second one and the third one are the personal writing statements and research writing statements, or writing the research statement and personal statements. If you want to be a part of these, there's a bit.ly link there. You can go to a Google form and sign up. Once I have dates, I'll send out an email. But to me, this is where the really important work happens, are in the writing workshops, because we will go through, share your statements, and do some peer editing, and a lot of conversation happens about how to make your story much more impactful and how to get a good hook and keep the reviewer reading. So go ahead and fill that out if you want to be involved, but I'll probably send those out sometime in August, the date. Okay, I am part of the College of Engineering Fellowship Office, which does have a website, which also means I am obligated to help you. And if you're not in the College of Engineering, I will still help you. Yeah, this is being taken over by a dedicated U of U scholarship office. I do kind of want to know a little bit about you, so I know what to kind of focus on. In the chat, could you just tell me what department you're from, and are you a senior or are you a grad student? And you don't have to share, but just kind of curious who I'm talking to, so I know how to tailor this. Chemistry, grad, BMSE, senior, okay. Biology, just your grad, chemistry, okay. Electrical, neuro, first year grad. So we've got a good representation from both the College of Science and College of Engineering. Chem, biochem. Okay. Thank you. That will help. Hopefully you've all spoke quite a bit about just the general reasons for applying for the scholarship in your previous workshops. I think I left some slides on here about that I'll kind of go through quickly because you probably already had this information. The reason why I'm here is because we've started this program in our college in 2012. Kind of synchronously, I was working with just my department. So I've been doing this since 2011. And since we've been doing it, these sorts of workshops, and again, I think these writing workshops we do are really useful. We've gone from having one award ever to having one award per year. And last year we had 3 awards in our department. So talking this through, giving it a lot of forethought, starting right now, like you're doing, is a huge help. So hopefully you find this information useful. Yeah, and then plus I'm here because I want to see you all succeed. I get such a joy come like April when I see the folks that were in the workshops win. It's a very nice feeling. We have a list of fellowships. A lot of this information can be applied to them. A lot of them will ask for a research statement, but here I'm going to mainly focus on the GRFP, which I think you are mostly interested in. I do want to emphasize that the new solicitation is not out. It should be out towards the end of July. So we don't have dates. And if there's any like significant changes, which probably not going to be any, we don't know what they are yet. So I can't cover everything in the solicitation. It's huge, as you can see. So you should become incredibly familiar with it. Don't just take my word for it. Please do not sue me. Or Matthew, don't sue me either. So hopefully you're all familiar with the basic details. Here they are right here. $34,000 plus some to the institution. But really, I think a lot of why people are going for this is, you know, the money is great, but it'll give you a lot of flexibility as to where you go to grad school. And it will be like a feather in your cap that you're constantly putting on your CV. It's usually like something that will lead into a career award if you go into academia. Also, if you're not a winner, you still get a lot of benefit from kind of bringing your future career into focus with something like this. You've probably got these statistics, so I'm going to go through these introductory slides kind of fast. You've got a pretty good chance, about 2,000 out of 12,000, 1 in 6. So we're here to improve those odds. But again, not again, but like I always say, this is kind of like gambling. You don't know who your reviewer is going to be. I'm going to talk about how you can kind of mitigate some of those risks in your research statement as I go. Eligibility, hopefully you've gone over that too. I did want to point out that they've got kind of a new-ish eligibility quiz that you can go through to help you figure out if you are eligible. I'd recommend doing that if you have any questions. But here I'm mainly going to be talking about the research plan, 2-page research plan. I do want to emphasize, I tell the story every time I talk about the GRFP, but please check the formatting on the solicitation, and don't, trust what you hear in a presentation like this. Get it directly from NSF. I've had this instance where we had one of our top students, probably would have been an awardee. This font size was the font size that this student turned in. It was rejected without review, and the font size below it is okay. The difference between those two is 10.95 versus 11-point font. This happened because of a conversion from LaTeX into a PDF, just decreased the font size a little bit, and their automated system kicked it out. I called them, got nothing. Our chair got nothing, and our dean got them to move not a single inch. So they just were out of luck. I would use a program that everybody's going to use, like Word. And I mean, if you do use LaTeX and then convert, just be absolutely certain. Scared, yeah, very scary for me. Okay. A little bit of insight, I think, is needed into the process, and maybe you've gotten some of this, but I think when we talk about the research statement, this is still important. You each get 3 reviewers. Reviewers have up to 50 applications to review. that means this many pages of documents show up in our inbox. We're going to spend maybe 10 to 20 minutes if we're a reviewer on each application. You'd like to think they spend more, but it's difficult because we get these over winter break when we should be spending time with our family. One thing that really drove this home was, here's a drawing my kid did of me over holiday break, and I'm just sitting there reading papers. Hopefully you get the point that what this means for you is you need to hook the reader both on your personal statement and your research statement and keep them involved throughout. You start to drift into things that seem irrelevant, and they are going to lose focus and start to skim. This also means, you can use tools like bolding important information. And if somebody's skimming, that's where their eye is going to stop, or using italics, that can help too. After you get the reviewers get the documents, they'll go through them, do their own review, and then they'll gather as a panel. There'll be a lead reviewer that kind of talks about talks about the candidates that they're responsible for. About 5 minutes. Top candidates, borderline candidates usually get discussed some more. Low candidates, not so much. And your research statement will get kind of evaluated based upon where you are. So an undergraduate senior will get a little bit of a different treatment than a grad student or a second-year grad student, just because we know what's kind of to be expected if we are a reviewer. Yeah, and then your research statement and your personal statement will be assessed on 5 levels of assessment. So poor, fair, good. And I put good in quotes because it's not really good. You get a good and you're probably not going to get it. But very good and excellent is where you want to be. They'll all be assessed broader impacts, intellectual merit. I'll talk more about those. But this kind of distinguishing between very good and excellent is usually based on like these big milestones, like you got a good GPA, you have some publications. You don't need them to win this, but they do certainly help. Strong research plan. Your research plan makes sense. That could get you to an excellence. And then there's like a score that you're given, and that can be the difference between you getting it or not, where you may have a bunch of people with a very good and a bunch of excellence, but if they're given a 95 versus a 96, that's going to make the difference. And those little details are what usually push somebody over the top there. Okay, you should also keep aware who your audience is. It's going to be STEM faculty, not necessarily in your discipline, which does mean when you're writing your research statement, you've got to be careful with jargon. I'll talk more about that as we get into it. But you should be keeping in mind why these people are doing this. What do they want? Really what we're after is to make as many impactful researchers and mentors as possible. On the GRFP website, it literally says the reviewers are meant to look to create future leaders. This means that we are not necessarily looking to fund your research that you propose. We are looking to fund you as a person. Okay. We want to make sure that you can follow the instructions and that you meet the review criteria, which you should become incredibly familiar with. If you look at the review criteria, you'll see that we are meant to assess your statements on both intellectual merit and broader impacts. I do want to emphasize that you are asked to put a separate section in both of your statements, personal and research statement, in which you address intellectual merit and broader impacts. So really, these sections should be what you would hope that the reviewer would paraphrase when they put in their comments about you as a candidate. So research statement needs to have both intellectual merit, broader impact statements. Hopefully you've talked about this. I'm sure you have. Intellectual merit is basically how are you going to advance the state of the art in your research field. It has to be a remarkable impact, can't be incremental. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So what kind of gives evidence to intellectual merit would be some sort of like presentations at conferences, publications, the information in your FastLane forms. But also, even though you've got like publications and conference presentations in your FastLane forms, try to bring them up in an effective way in your personal statement and research statement. I'll talk more about that. Broader impacts, this sometimes gets ignored in the research statements, but again, this is how a reviewer is expected to review your application. So you need to pay attention to that in both statements. NSF gives a nice list. Usually you'd bring up this sort of thing in your personal statement, like volunteer work, tutoring, outreach activities. But in your research statement, you can talk about how your research will benefit society, how it will benefit like an impactful field of research. You can also talk about how you're going to disseminate your work. I'll give some examples of that as we go on. If you don't have a lot of broader impacts in your first year grad student, I think, and you're trying to make a decision whether or not you push this off a year, I would try to push it off. It seems to me like weak broader impacts are most often the cause of a really high achieving student not getting the GRFP. Okay, just general advice with the statement. Here's an example one I've blurred out. You'll see that kind of they've used all the space. They've used paragraphs. Two things that really kind of turn off reviewers is if you don't use all the space, it conveys that you didn't have enough quality information to share. It could come off as lack of experience. The other thing I want to point out is don't give this wall of text where it is just the statement is like a paragraph that goes on forever. Hey, use that return button. Paragraphs should have like succinct ideation, like where they start with an idea, they support it, and maybe have a concluding sentence and then go on to the next idea. Again, follow the rules.
For me, it's kind of
proofread.
a lot of times it's kind of the opposite of what Tamir was saying, because like verbal encouragement and stuff.
Oh, Connor, I missed that. What was it?
Sorry, that was my background. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. Been there. Okay. Have other people proofread your documents. Your research statement is going to make complete sense to you because you had the idea and you put it down. Somebody else who reads it is not going to have any idea what you thought was your brilliant idea. They're not going to catch that. So have friends, family, other people, other faculty read your statements. I always give this example of when I started this job, I really wanted to stay on as lecturing faculty. And I wrote this long email about all the great things I wanted to do. Probably read it 10 times before I pressed send to my chair. At the very end of it, it said best regards Tiny instead of Tony. That I is just right next to that O. And every time I read it, I read best regards Tony because that's what I thought I wrote. But you know, you read what you think you wrote. You don't read what you wrote. So get somebody else. Submit it early. We've seen problems. And then use the example winning applications. Okay. I'm going to get into the nitty gritty of the research statements now. So the first thing you're going to need is some really cool idea. It has to be cutting edge. A couple times, like every year when we do these workshops, somebody comes in with a research statement where it's clear that they're just doing what they've always done in their lab, but they're going to do it at a different pH now, or use a slightly different solvent or something like that. And that is not going to cut it. It can't be incremental. It has to be your idea. This can get a little dicey, but you're going to have to attest to the fact that this research idea was something that you came up with, you fleshed it out. This doesn't mean that you can't go talk to your PI and be like, here's a bunch of ideas and bounce them off your PI and then claim that as your idea. But just know that you're going to have to attest to the fact that this is your idea. And if your PI writes a letter of recommendation, which they should, if you're in their lab, if they don't, it's going to be a little suspect. They're going to have to attest to the fact that this research idea is your idea and not theirs. It has to be reasonable. Don't promise too much. That's another big error that I see in the research statements is that the candidate is promising things that could be done maybe by 3 grad students in like a decade. You have to show that you know what is reasonable. Okay, then the next sort of things I'd start to consider is what does your personal statement support? So do you show lab experience that supports this research? But you should also be very passionate about this. So one of the winners that I share the application of worked undergrad whole time in petroleum. Absolutely did not want to do that for the graduate work, wanted to go into biochem engineering and completely shifted gears. But in the research statement, they still used their past research experience to support what they were proposing, to convey that they still had those skills. So while, you know, you shouldn't feel like you're stuck with that research idea if you research area, if you've been in it, you should still use it to support your research statement. If you don't have any really good ideas, I would go talk to your PI or talk to other faculty that are working in that area that you're interested in. Ask them if they can recommend some good articles, cutting edge articles. What's new and exciting? What are the hurdles? Or go to Google Scholar and just find the most recent review article. So if you're interested in cold fusion review, Google Scholar, that'll give you a bunch of things. Often in the review articles, they will have kind of like, here's the key hurdles, here's where we're going next. Just make sure that you look at the most recent review articles. So you can, of course, like set the date from like 2019 on or something like that. If you're afraid that what you propose is what you're going to be stuck with the rest of your graduate career, fear not. Really, nobody is going to check up on you. Nobody's going to check that you're going to do the research that you proposed in your GRFP packet. Nobody really cares that you stick with it. Really, reviewers want to see that you can come up with a feasible idea. It's original. It seems like it's going to be impactful, and that is well thought out. You've got a good plan. And you're also going to want to sense that you are passionate about the area. So we want to make sure that whoever's being funded here is not just doing this because they're going through the motions, but they really care about this area. So you'll see in the instructions to reviewers that reviewers are meant to identify leaders, not really identify like promising new research areas. So just keep that in mind. After you got your ideas, hopefully you got more than one, I would workshop those ideas, hopefully with other people, with help from your PI or other people in your lab or friends. When we do this for our capstone labs, when students have to come up with new ideas, we borrow tools from the business school, which I think are really helpful. So we use a lean canvas model. And so here's an example of a lean canvas model for iTunes. But we make it kind of tailored to an engineering idea, which I think can also relate to a STEM idea. I mean, a science idea. So one of the first things you'd identify is what is the problem that you're addressing? Engineering and science too, there's going to be a human problem at the center of it. So the idea with this sort of lean canvas workshopping is that you're not coming up with full sentences. You're literally putting things on a Post-it note and sticking them on a wall, and maybe you're pulling them off, putting them back on, rewriting them. This is a messy process. So you should be asking yourself, what is the problem you're solving? This is often described as the pain statement. So what is the discomfort people are experiencing that you are going to address with the work you're proposing? There aren't a lot of new problems that are going to be addressed with a GRFP research plan. So you should be looking at, what are the existing solutions? How can you make them better? A lot of research plans that I read kind of just assume the reader knows why this research is important. Maybe it's given a clause in a opening sentence. It needs to be a bit more strongly emphasized. You don't know who's reading this, what their background is. They may not have the technical background that you have to know why this area is important. If you're in the College of Science, you're probably more used to expressing the pain statement in kind of a roundabout way as a hypothesis. So it's a question you're going to answer. Hopefully that question has some utility. Typically, in the research plan, students who win these do have a hypothesis expressly down in their research statement. I would also do this for if you're going in the engineering field, even though it's not as common and students do win the GRFP without having a clear hypothesis written down. I think it is safe because you don't know if you're going to get somebody in the review panel that is just a stickler for every research activity needs to have a clear hypothesis to start with. Next thing on the canvas would be, what are you physically going to do as part of this research? So specific round of experiments. Do you have to build something? Do you have to code something? Do you have to learn a new coding language or something like that? Are you going to do field tests? Are you going to work with human subjects? All that needs to be expressed in your research plan. No minutia, though. You probably wouldn't do this for a GRFP, but every now and then I'll see people talk about, I don't know, like they'll give every temperature they plan to examine, where you could just give a range or something like that. And you can win without this, but I prefer every research plan have some sort of clear timeline associated with it. So you got about 5 years. What is going to be done at what mile mark? At the maybe year resolution or half year resolution. If you're going to say what the step is in your research plan, it's not very hard to put a parenthetical like time right next to it. Okay, the next area would be skills and tools. So what sort of skills do you need to execute this? Is there evidence that you have those skills? If not, how are you going to pick them up? What equipment are you going to need? Is it available to you? Does your PI have access to it? What are the costs? So this is in a lean canvas, of course, because this is a business model tool. Not all that important because you're all going to get the same money. You don't have to like say what piece of equipment you're going to buy with this $34,000. But the reviewer is going to want to know is what you're planning. Is that reasonable for PhD work? Is the like analyte you're going to use, is that like worth more than its weight in gold and you are going to use like way too much of it? They're going to want to know that the PI that you've identified is appropriate and they have access to the tools. Like they're not going to have to spend $500,000 in order to have you as a grad student. Risks. This is a huge area for any engineering proposal because, it might cost nothing, or it might like ruin the company. It might ruin the research lab if something goes wrong. So if there's like a clear EHS risk to the research you're proposing, reviewer is going to want to see that you're cognizant of that and that you know how to mitigate that. But they're also going to want to see that if there's a very clear risk that a key step is going to fail or a key piece of equipment is going to become unavailable, that you've got some contingencies. You've got 2 pages here though. So you're going to have to like identify like really key weaknesses if they are there and address only those. You don't have paragraphs of space to go on with contingencies. You want to point out that any sort of time you've got a human subject, and if any of you are doing like STEM education proposals for the GRFP, your research plan should address the need to get IRB approval. If you're doing any sort of medical research with any sort of patients, it would be good in your research plan just to acknowledge that you can't just take human subjects and start researching on them. I think it is good to show that you understand that there's like an internal review board that you're going to have to go to, and make sure that your research is humane and subjects are protected. So I would mention that. Relationships. So if you are working with people outside of your lab, that's going to be a very important relationship, and it can be a risk to your proposal. So who do you need? Are you going to identify an appropriate PI? And I'll talk a little bit about that. But are you going to be working with like a national lab? Do you need to show that you've got relationships with them, or that your PI has those relationships? Customers. Usually this is like the key relationship. This is who you're trying to sell your idea to. You may not ever interact with them. In the GRFP, your customer is your reviewer, but also it can be some identified program in the NSF or DOE or DOD. You could be proposing something to work in partnership with a company. They should be identified in your research statement. And also before you start to say who your customer is and kind of address their needs, you need to stop and ask yourself what motivates them, what do they want? So like for a reviewer, it's again to identify leaders in STEM. Channels, so what tools you're going to use to communicate. In business, these are very different. At an engineering company, if you were to do this lean canvas activity, these channels would be very different. In your GRFP, the channels are going to be some identified means of disseminating your work. So these can be conferences, target journals that you plan to publish in. You should, I think it shows some good forethought to having your research plan a very short publication strategy. So, what does your first paper look like? What does that contain? Where does that go? Second paper, third paper. To me, I think that shows a lot of insight into what your graduate career is going to look like and how you can make the most of it. And then also it speaks to your broader impacts, because disseminating your work is part of how you'll be judged as far as broader impacts go. Okay, then revenue. They again are giving you money. They're not, hoping for money in return. They're hoping to create a leader in STEM. But one of the things that you are asked to comment on is in your personal statement where you are headed with your career, but your research statement should also attest to that plan. So how does this research give you more marketable skills? How does it get you to where you want to be? And maybe you want to become a professor in academia. How does that play in? How does that research play into that plan? And a sentence or two about that would be advisable. The last thing on the canvas is the value proposition. You can see some value propositions here listed for various companies. The idea behind a value proposition is this is kind of what guides you through authoring your research plan. This should be something that isn't necessarily explicitly stated, but it should be something that if I was to read your research plan, I should be able to go to a different faculty member and say, this research plan means this, and give them one sentence what it means. It should be simple. It should just follow from your research plan. And while it doesn't have to be explicitly stated, I probably would end with that. That would be my take-home message as my value proposition for this research. Okay, once you go through this process of putting all this stuff on Post-it notes or however you want to do it in like a spreadsheet, then you need to take all these disjointed ideas, put them together and make a document, a 2-page research plan. I wouldn't probably do that right away. If you could get a faculty member to look at if you do the lean canvas activity, to look at that. I'll give you some worksheets later, and if you're more comfortable with that method, you can share those with your faculty member. But I would get some input before I started to commit to a document. Okay, but when you do, I do want to emphasize that this document should be a continuation of your GRFP story. So in your personal statement, you kind of set the foundation. You told them who you are. Your research statement needs to build on that. Doing that, you should use effective repetition. So hopefully you look at that symbol there, you realize it's a stop sign. You realize it's a stop sign without it saying stop, because there's other cues that tell you what that stop sign is supposed to mean. Well, it does say stop, just not in English. So you should try to bring up these other hints about your effectiveness in your research plan that you've already brought up in your personal statement. So past lab experiences, awards, publications, if you can work them into your research statement, do that. And then again, you mentioned long-term goals in your personal statement, should come up again in your research plan. Okay, technical content. You're going to show that you've got strong technical acumen, which means that you should go into the details of the work. However, as I say here, here's an example of a winning research statement. You'll see that they go through and they convey that they're able to converse on a very deep level on this research area. However, they go through and explain all the technical terms, because you don't know, this particular research statement is about detecting cancer. A biomedical engineer who specializes in this particular kind of detection of cancer could be reading this, but it could also be a civil engineer that specializes in concrete that has no idea about any of the technical details here. So use jargon, use it wisely though, and give definitions. You can include references as double check. I think they have them as endnotes. Use them sparingly. You don't want to have half a page of references. It doesn't make your proposals seem stronger. Just keep key references in your area or references to your own work so you can bring those up again. Figures, use those sparingly too. It can come off that you're just trying to fill space if you use up too much space for a figure. I would favor figures that you have made that kind of illustrate your research plan or that relate to past work that kind of supports future work that you're proposing, but they should really motivate the proposed work. They could come from your PI also. The other thing you may want to do is show that in your research plan that you've chosen an appropriate PI. I mentioned that in the Lean Canvas activity a couple times, but one of the things the reviewer is asked is to make sure that there are adequate resources available to the PI. So you may want to describe the expertise of the person you propose to work under, and also what sort of lab equipment they have access to. And then again, there needs to be some sort of statement of originality. So if you identify this PI and they have a letter of recommendation, you're going to want them to also know that they should state in there that this research plan is your idea, not theirs. Okay. I'm going to stop there and ask if I've got any questions before I keep going.
I actually had one on this slide. So I know you say like we need to like specify our PI. So I guess if we're choosing a PI like at a university we haven't worked at and like we haven't worked with that PI, do you think that would be like something that would hurt us and we should focus on like a PI we've worked with instead? Or I guess how should we approach that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would recommend that you don't put a PI down that you haven't had some sort of contact with. Because it is a gamble. I mean, you could do it, and there is a really good chance that somebody on that panel has no idea who this person is, and they've never worked with them. There is a slim chance that on that panel will be that person, and they'll be wondering why you have not reached out to them. So you've got plenty of time. I would, if you can find this person's email, and it should be pretty easy, sending them an email saying, hey, I'm a graduating senior in this discipline. I'm applying to the GRFP. I am hoping I can put you down as a prospective PI. This does not mean that they have to accept you, and I'd make it clear that you don't expect that. However, if you do win the GRFP, I have never seen anybody be turned down. I've seen people win the GRFP and decide they're not going to grad school, so they didn't apply anywhere, and then they found out that they got the GRFP. There was not a single school that was unwilling to break the rules and let them into their department because they won the GRFP. So as a faculty member, I could hardly imagine somebody ignoring that email. I mean, at least they'd send you back something like, yeah, I'm supportive of this. Just a moment.
So it's okay if we don't have a letter of recommendation from that PI as long as like we just like have their permission, right?
Yes. So, and if you don't know this person, do not get a letter of recommendation from them. Do not ask for that. I'll get into letters of recommendation in a bit, but this example I have here on this slide is from a winning GRFP proposal. This student had only contacted this professor by email. So that is exactly what happened here. The professor did not write a letter of recommendation for them. This was a University of Utah student, identified a PI at the University of Washington, and all worked out. But I would touch base with them because, yeah, you don't know. It could be somebody that knows this person, or it could be that person. So
Okay.
good question.
Thank you.
If you haven't gotten into a lab and you're a senior, it's you gotta move quick. Hopefully we have some. If we've got some, first year, second year, you can do this now. Get into a lab, paid or unpaid. If you're a grad student, it's too late for that. However, I would make your intentions very clear if you're already in a lab that you want to get a publication, you want to get a poster at a conference, you want to get a presentation at a conference. It is different work. It is something that your PI needs to know that you're after. I would say that I'm hoping to apply for the GRFP. I need to build up my personal statement and my research history. Is there a conference coming up that I can get a poster in or something like that? Also, if you're going to ask for a letter of recommendation from the PI of the lab that you're working in, make sure you give them a good story to tell. So if you're working in the lab, put in a little extra effort, come through when they really need somebody. That's the sort of story that they're going to tell in their letter of recommendation. So they're going to want some sort of quantifiable benefit that you gave to the lab. Wouldn't hurt in your ask for a letter to remind them of the things that you've done so that they'll mention it. So yeah, new lab capabilities, new methods. Give them something new that they don't know that they want, because that is the story they're going to tell. Broader impacts. So this is usually in the personal statement where you talk about like K-12 outreach and stuff like that. However, I think it is very strong to tie your research proposal to whatever you're proposing to do. So if you're proposing to do some like K-12 outreach to a particular underrepresented group, I would mention how that outreach ties into your research proposal. So it could be a teaching module that is related to whatever you propose. Yes. So usually this is more related to the personal statement. So I'm going to move through, but make sure that this is genuine. A lot of like broader impact outreach work or working with underrepresented groups comes off as shallow. So if you're going to mention an underrepresented group, mention what are their particular hurdles to becoming integrated into a STEM community, and show that you've done some background research. Okay, when you sit down and write, I've given you two tools. One that I prefer would be the link canvas, but this bit.ly link, which you can copy, or you can just use the link to these slides, will link to some worksheets, which basically has this information, but instead in a worksheet form. General advice, don't feel like you need to start at the start. If you've done the lean canvas, you've got these Post-its, I would just start with like sentences that kind of build into paragraphs. But to me, it is usually best to start in the middle and then do the intro paragraph and then do the end. Yeah, no keywords. I mean, start with keywords, build those into phrases, build those into sentences, then build paragraphs. Doesn't need to be pretty, doesn't need to sound good. Once you've got the story, you got a good narrative, then go back and make the grammar sound nice. Use that perfect adjective, but don't worry about it when you're just trying to write, because you'll get writer's block that way. And then proofread when you got a final narrative. Yeah, if you start to like get stuck at a place, move on. Just write a different section. Usually that helps. Sleeping on it is going to be a huge help. You don't want to be doing this like the last couple days before it's due, because you're going to want to like struggle with it, put it aside, sleep, wake up, and usually that's when you'll have a much better story to tell. I know I'm just supposed to talk about research statements, but really there should be some sort of seminar for faculty about how to write a proper letter of recommendation for you. The GRFP is going to be a different letter of recommendation than just like one for you trying to get a job in industry. You are allowed 3 letters of recommendation, but 2 alternate letters. So you can ask 5 people. 3 of them will be selected. The reason they do this is because 1 might not come through and they're going to have to select from one of the alternates. I would aim for a very balanced perspective on you. So if you've got a really good like letter of recommendation from your PI, and then maybe you worked in industry and you got a good letter of recommendation from your boss there, and then maybe you've done some charitable work, and maybe you've done some STEM outreach, a great letter of recommendation from like a high school counselor or a teacher. I think having a nice balanced 3 would help. That doesn't mean that you have to have that, 2 research LORs and then like a industry LOR is fine. You can win with like 3 letters of recommendation, all from academia. That is fine too. I would ask them soon. I would ask them now, because it'll fall off their radar. And then I would remind them towards the end of September. You will know when they put those in. I would ask for what you want. Don't just ask for, can you write me a letter? Ask if they can write you a positive letter. I would give them the NSF prompt. It is right here. It tells them exactly what needs to be in that letter. And again, if they're your advisor, they need to make a statement. This research is your idea. I've got permission to share a couple letters of recommendation I've written for students that have won the GRFP. So you could, if they want an example, you can give them this. Do keep in mind and make sure that they know they need to comment on your intellectual merit and your broader impacts, just like you do. So they need to give convincing evidence. It should be a personal story. They cannot just say like, this student regularly attended my class, they got an A. That is not convincing. You'll see in the letters of recommendation that I gave where I tell about times when this student like went above and beyond, did something that really helped me. I express my personal feelings about this student. And then this is another opportunity to bring up your accomplishments. So if I've authored a paper with a student, the paper is probably in your FastLane application, but I'm going to bring it up again in my letter of recommendation. You cannot trust that the people reviewing these are going to read everything on the FastLane. You want to give them as many opportunities as possible to catch all your details. Excuse me, just a sec. They should, if it's a PI, they need to give evidence that you can accomplish what you propose, which does mean that they should have read your personal statement and your research statement. This is part of the story that you're building. It should be part of the whatever the stories they tell should be part of this kind of expanded universe of your MCU. Next. Okay, clock is ticking. We don't know exactly when it explodes for you all yet. Again, look at the solicitation when it comes out later this month. So it should be towards the end of August. We will have like those writing workshops towards the end. I know a lot of you won't write this stuff until you are right up against the deadline. We will have, actually the last workshop we have, again, here's the bit.ly link. The last one we have is just, we'll get together and pass these around and make sure the whole story makes sense, where like your personal statement matches up with your research statement and it all kind of supports each other. So again, if you're interested, use that bit.ly link. Excuse me, some homework. Again, that bit.ly link. I don't know exactly when those dates are going to be. I would go to the GRFP site, read everything they give for applicants. When they get the solicitation, read through that whole solicitation, as painful as it is. Read the examples, download those, don't share them. I would produce draft statements over the summer. They are going to change significantly in the fall, but I would start in on that, at least do like that lean canvas activity. Shop around research ideas. Oh, I put a date on there, I didn't mean to. But yeah, we will do a research statement workshop around the 28th, not necessarily the 28th of September, and then ask for supportive letters. I would do that now. Okay, that is it. I hope I've helped. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Thank you so much, Tony. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself, or you can type them into the chat box. And while you're typing or thinking of your question, this is being recorded, so this will be uploaded to our website, nsf-grfp.utah.edu. And I'll send an email with that information once it's uploaded, as well as these different links, this presentation and such that Tony has shared with us. So the time is now yours for any questions or concerns that you might have.
I guess I have another question. So earlier in the presentation, you talked about how like you, even if we're trying to propose a project in a different field, we still want to use a lot of, or we still want to use like our previous research experience. And I guess like, is there a way that we should be approaching that? Like, should we be saying like, we'll be using similar skills, or like, it's just the idea of research in general? I guess like, how would you want to approach that?
So very often the same analytical equipment can be used in more than one area. The same, like if you applied machine learning to petroleum, you can apply machine learning to biomedical applications. But then just the ability to do effective experimental design, like if you were involved in like coming up with a box banking experimental design for your previous research, all that is going to be applicable still to future research. So yes, lean on it however you can. If you're having trouble finding connections, I would talk to a faculty member that works in the new area and talk about your past area with them and see where they can find ways for you to bring it up effectively again.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions before we close?
Sorry, just one more actually. So with courses, is that something that we should be mentioning about like where we've gained certain abilities and skills, or should it be more focused on the research that we've done before?
I think courses can be very effective if they directly apply to whatever you're proposing. So again, I mean, if you've taken like the nano fabrication lab and what you're proposing to do involves that, I would talk about that. If you've done like a student project or a senior capstone project that relates directly to your proposed work, even though that's part of a course, I think that's still important. I wouldn't mention like core courses to your discipline, because every reviewer will just assume that you've had those.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, any other questions? Last call for questions. Okay, I suppose we'll go ahead and end there. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we look forward to working with you as you prepare to submit your GRFP application.